Welcome to Fear with Christine Spratley. Living like a head in charge, the podcast where Christine says fear, questions everything, and takes bold action. Christine Spratley is a former professional boxer, nanny, and 29-plus year corporate warrior turned founder of HBIC Advisors, where she is a public speaker and coach. She's been saying fear her whole life, many times without even realizing it. So tune in, spread the word, and get ready, because this isn't about aging with grace. It's about aging with mischief, audacity, and having a damn good story to tell.
Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to Fuck Fear with Christine Spratley. This is our last segment of LUVE, and in that segment, LUVE, LUVE, we talk about the communication of when you're hearing and you're in a discussion or an argument or really any sort of dialogue that may have some conflict. I guess it might be a way to put it, Joe, and how to interact with that person, both in a professional setting, but also in a personal setting. And so we went through, L, listen, U, understand, V, validate. And today, being the last segment, we are in E for empathize. But before we do that, we're going to do our immunity shots because, God, I need this. I'm dragging today. All right. Well, ready?
Here we go. Yep.
Go. Oh, that had a lot of pepper. Ooh. Wow. Oh, Lord. All right. Here we go, trigger. So, ladies and gentlemen, we're going to talk about empathize. And how do we get from validate to empathize? Because, Joe, you mentioned the other day in our last episode how the L and the U lead you to the V. Like, you can't get to a validation point if you don't listen, get the data, understand their logic. You can't validate their reality at that point. So that leads us to empathize. So if you don't have any of these other elements, you're not going to be able to empathize. So what it does is empathy basically, validation calms, okay, the person. It says, okay, I get it. I get where you're coming from. But empathy is the action of connecting. This is kind of, and when I was getting ready to do this, I thought about your comment the other day of what are we here for? Why are we having this conversation? What is the reason? And it's to connect with the other person. And so along the listen, we're listening. We're not saying anything. We're not doing anything. We're understanding, okay, I see where you're coming from. I'm again stepping into yours. Then we're validating. And now we're going into, okay, I can feel this. Your validation is your feelings make sense. And empathy is more around the perspective of literally getting into, you can do it three ways. You can do it cognitive empathy, effective empathy, or compassionate empathy. And I really like that because I thought empathy was solely, I had to feel that way. Like I had to really resonate with that feeling in me. And we talked about this off the air. There's a lot of situations where that's just not humanly possible for me to feel that, effective emotional empathy, where my body mirrors theirs in the moment. There are times when I can, but there's also the cognitive empathy and the empathetic and compassionate, which is more empathetic concern. And I thought this was really kind of cool because the definition, because, we talked about this the other day too, we kind of think about what words really mean by define, not what we think they mean. And the definition is the ability to understand and share feelings with another. And it basically, I can walk beside you and feel this without hijacking you in your shoes. You know, like I don't need to take over the conversation. I don't need to, but I'm going to walk right with you in that emotion. And cognitive is, you know, it's more of the validation of it, but it's more of, okay, yeah, I get that. I get that. I'm stepping into your perspective and the situation makes sense. And it's more of kind of like the validation of it, but it is still empathy. The affective is, oh my God, I feel that knot in my stomach too. You know, like I literally feel that way. Or I get, when someone I care about gets hurt and I see them in pain, something like that. And then the compassion is, you know, let's kind of do something together to calm them. It's like taking a compassionate action, which I thought was really good because I did look up and kind of go into compassion versus empathy and what that was versus what I thought it was. And compassion really is more about the other person's well-being, you know, kind of performing it from that perspective. And I thought that was interesting because empathy is a way to get to a compassionate state. And you know, it's warm concern plus action, if that makes sense. It allows me to have kind of like the other person's well-being in mind, and then showing, hey, yeah, I can see how that hurts you, or I can see now what can I do? Can we set some boundaries? You know, and that I think is really incredible when I can get to that state where it is, again, your well-being is paramount. And not just from the listening part is what's your greatest challenge, but the emotional part. Does that make sense, Joe? Because we've talked a lot about the challenge, your greatest challenge, but then we flip into this emotional empathy part of being compassionate about, gosh, that's your challenge. Okay, how do we get there? How do I make this easier for you? How do we tap into resolving that emotion? Does that make any sense?
Yeah, I think so. It seems like they serve slightly different functions, but it could be bad to mess them up because I think that one of them has like you're feeling with them and almost like a sense of ownership, which can get tiring, and one almost feels like you're understanding what they're going through, but not taking that on.
Yeah. Well, and I think because I did look up, there's this phrase that's used, and it's not a kind of a psychological model or anything, but it is called toxic empathy, and we'll get into that. But again, it's not a phrase, but there are other phrases that people are using it to align with, and that's what you're talking about, where you're kind of have that empathetic fatigue. But this is one of the reasons why I thought was interesting is that emotional intelligence, I think empathy is it's one of the items under emotional intelligence that helps score how you score on emotional intelligence. Your ability to get into that other person's shoes and walk with them with that feeling. But this is why empathy matters in a conversation. What happens? Because we talked about this with validation. What happens to the other person when they experience empathy? And it calms. The physiology in our body calms us. Our heart rhythm steadies. It's the hormonal buffer, the oxytocin cut cortisol during stress tests. So it's like it lowers everything. And again, if you think about what we're doing, we're listening. There's no action really on our part. to ignite the situation or add gasoline to the fire. We're understanding again. We're pausing this. We're putting our advice monster into check, and then 3, we're validating. So again, we talked about those physiological things that happen to the body and the way it calms it, and then we get to this, and again, it cuts it down and it slows us down. So all of what we're doing, instead of adding gasoline to the fire where we give the quickest wrong answer or reach the answer that is not even the right question, we're giving advice or we're, feeling defensive. We are adding fuel to the fire. We're not doing any of that. We're actually literally calming this person down. And sometimes it's calming me down. And then the other thing is, we talked about this, is it again reinforces that there's no threat here. And I thought this was kind of taking me aback, is because when I was doing this, the word threat came up a lot. And when I'm having a conversation with somebody, I thought about this as like, okay, well, I'm having a conversation with a friendship or something that's a little stressful. I very seldom go, are they threatened right now? And again, we think of threat as, ooh, but it can be these little micro things that build up. And so it's like, I just never thought about that from this perspective. But if I'm continually calming and going, hey, everything's safe, there's no threat here, that's a pretty powerful thing to do. But I don't know how many, and again, listeners, I just thought it was really interesting to see another person talking to me in a conversation that was even low stakes conversations. But you know how sometimes we'll be talking and that conversation shifts? Like you just feel that energy shift? Mm-hmm. I don't ever go, I may notice a shift, but I don't typically go, ooh, I wonder if they're threatened. I wonder if if they feel a little bit different. I typically go, ooh, what's going on? It's about me, what? And so I thought that was a great way to look at a conversation and go, I wonder if they feel threatened. I wonder if there's a threat. And, but again, this is why it matters, because if there is, and they're acting and reacting from that, or if I am, then it allows basically me to, again, validate and then go into, hey, there's no threat. Say, get this. We're going to figure out how to get this feeling better than what you're going now. It's kind of like your vagus nerve, and from what I read, and again, as you can tell, as I'm stumbling through this is one I had Rhea on. I'd like to have Rhea on. But from what I gather and what I have studied for this episode, and I've actually read a lot, which is scary, or listened to a lot because I listen to everything on audio. But the vagus nerve is basically going, chill, all good here. Safe now, let's think. And when we get to that point, then we can start to have a conversation about changing a perspective or a point of view or something like that. Because again, when I am in that mode of, okay, I'm good, I am more likely to be open to you and to listen to you and to see what's going on with you, or to consider your point of view, let alone hear it. And so I thought that was interesting, because it's almost like the whole idea of LUVE and empathy is really about understanding where that person's coming from and then letting them know that that's okay. And then finally going, it's safe here. Now we can have a conversation about just what we need to take place, or in difficult conversations. But that's why I think it's so important, is all the things that it does from both a trust and disclosure standpoint, from the physiology of our body, and that works. But then, because I know people, some people listen to this podcast for business stuff, and the numbers are just crazy. the numbers of impact on business. And I know this from working in my background in Big Four, but there's tons of studies out there, and I'll give them the studies that I'm pulling these numbers from. But this is one that caught me. And this was done by my old firm, EY. And it was an empathy in business survey that they did in 2023. And I want you to, because everybody, in EY, it was margin, 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 margin. And margin, for those that don't know, is basically your profit. It's basically the top. It's like after everything gets done, it's what you go home with. And again, we wanted margin. And I don't know anybody in business who doesn't like a good fat margin. 87% of workers say mutual empathy boosts efficiency. And one of the biggest things that you get with margin to generate margin is efficiency. And that means in doing it and not having to redo it, because it is basically, on a rates and hours, you can get it done right, and you churn it out, and then you can go on and do more and more. But again, I thought that 87% of people in that study said, yeah, mutual empathy boosts efficiency. Senior leaders, empathy, 76% engagement, 62% creativity is looked for, and that's a Catalyst study and done in 2021. I mean, that is what they're looking for in senior leaders, is empathy. So I think, and we've all been in rooms where we've seen the lack of empathy. And what that does, not only to that person, but to the rest of the room in business. And the lack of, because it's not only, and this is something we'll go into, because we're going to talk about this specifically for women, but when we have an experience, we tend to take that experience with us when we leave. So if I'm not empathetic to someone, and I shut them down, shut them out, and I don't continue on with saying, hey, this is safe. Now we can think. Now you don't have to be on defensive. When do they ever get out of that state? If I continually do that, because they take it with them, they remember, oh, this is how I interacted with Christine. It wasn't quite safe. And I know I remember. That I have a coffee mug that says I don't hold grudges, I just remember facts. And so if I'm remembering the fact that there was no empathy here, this is not cool, this is not safe, I am less likely to engage not only then, but the next time and the next time. Or I'm going to engage from a defensive posture or a protective posture in business and in relationships. And I think women, there was a study done by McKinsey where women felt that they carry disproportionate emotional labor, yet are rarely rewarded for it in business. And I've seen it. I have so seen it. I've seen some of the women on my teams carry the emotional accountability, the emotional, and I'm not saying that we have to, but I'm saying they're the only ones bringing it together to make it a safe space for everybody. And they do all that work, but yet they don't, you often hear women go, or people describe, oh, mom was the glue of the family. Mom was, mom just figured it out. If you walk into some of these rooms and businesses, that's what you see. You see the emotional safety net being prepared and laid out by women, but that is not something, and again, people call it emotional intelligence, but they tend to not think about the emotional safety net of the group and reward that financially. There's also, because I looked at women, empathy in women, and the lack of the undervalidation and therefore of a woman's emotion, and then also the impact of that if they don't validate it and they can't get there and they can't see that logic in that, then they can't empathize. And how much there's a pain study done by Yale that basically showed that women are basically labeled over emotional. So identical emotions by this study showed that identical emotions labeled, expressions were labeled over emotional in women, but not in men. So again, it's this, hey, no, you're not good. Your feeling is not good. And therefore, this is not a safe space for you. And what's interesting is that in the pain study, it showed that women were undertreated because of that. And we've talked about that before. We've talked about those numbers. So again, it seeps out into society. And I remember someone very close to me going, I cannot empathize with you. And I was like, well, no, that's a choice. Because it doesn't have to mean that, again, you feel it, but you can show compassionate empathy with me. You can say, okay, yeah, what do we want to do about that? Like, how do I make this easier for you to change that emotion? I see that emotion. Oh, let's do something about that.
Your event doesn't just need a host, it needs a ringmaster of energy. Christine Spratley reads the room and keeps the momentum rolling like a damn orchestra conductor. With insight, humor, and a splash of mischief, she'll make sure your event isn't just organized, it's electric. After Christine takes the stage, your audience will be fully present, fired up, and not scrolling on their phones. Book her now at christinespratley.com.
One of the things that I'm also experiencing is trying to, what you talked about earlier about running on empty with empathy. When you overextend, I will call it. And again, this was talked about in, they call it toxic empathy, but it's not a true psychology. I don't know what you call that. But it is empathetic distress or fatigue. That's kind of like the established research term, or compassion fatigue. And you over-identify with others' pains, emotional exhaustion, withdrawal, or burnout. And what this does is that I've noticed it when I trauma bond with somebody, or I tend to use empathy, and then I get to I'm going to feel this with you, and I don't take it anywhere with anybody else. In the sense of, let's make this better. Let's get this so we don't feel this way again. Let's, like, how do we do this? Like, what do you want to go? Where do you want to go from here? Kind of thing. And I thought that was really interesting because, like any action, even the sun burns if you get too much of it, and so it's like, I need to understand that my empathy is the next step, but it doesn't stop with, I just feel your feelings. And I like that because I'm all about what comes next. What comes next in the conversation, what comes next in the how do we make this better? How do we what actions do I need to take to make me feel better? But I think that really, when I empathize with somebody, it's turning the validation into a shared moment. It's, I may show and say, God, tell me more about how you feel. What part hits you the hardest? I feel concerned too. Let's see what our options are. If I've sent you something, and this happens in business all the time, where I would totally blindside my staff, my team, my staff. I never had staff. If anybody, I worked for them. They were that good. But I would blindside them with something. And I didn't think I blindsided. And I was like, but I learned to go, oh, I see that's how you feel. You feel really blindsided. Let's work on this tomorrow. Let's do the deck tomorrow. Let's, because again, it's that supportive touch of the emotion, not just understanding it, not just validating it and saying, yes, I see this emotion that you're having, but then it's this, how am I going to show up and show you that this is safe? And it turns kind of like the conversation of me into an us, and me versus us and you, and it's then us versus the problem or the challenge. That I really like, because it makes sense. I mean, love makes sense, and it makes sense to end on empathy. Because it's a way for me to show, whether that be in business or whatever, that everything that I've done, listened, I've got the data, I do understand, I've stepped into your logic, I validate your feelings, and now I'm going to empathize with you, and now I'm going to show you that I listened, understand, and validated, and I'm going to show you that your feelings have purpose and meaning to me, because I'm going to do something about that to take it forward. So I don't know. I thought this was a really great way to wrap it up, because again, it changes the purpose of the conversation for me. And, whether it's how do I do this, or like you're in an argument with your wife or something, I think, or your husband, most of my later readers, or your kids or your friend or whoever. Again, it changes the reason why we're having this conversation. And it changes my purpose for being in this conversation. My purpose is not to tell, control, educate, save, show you the right way to do it, And I think of how much more I know about interactions today, that if I would have known it coming up in business, and instead of just buck up and shut up, or shut up and buck up, or even in relationships, I don't think, some things would have changed, others wouldn't have. But this gives me options for the dialogue to change and the relationship to change. When I show empathy and I go, okay, all right, I get this now. I can see that. God, that hit me too. How can we not make that happen again? And this has been a real thought-provoking for me. I hope it has been for my audience. Joe, are you done with this?
No, I've been enjoying it. I was going to ask, because I don't want to open up a whole new wing.
No, let's open up a whole new wing.
I think I'm going to ask a question, and I think I have my answer.
Okay.
So what do you do for the person that says, all right, but I'm the person that gives empathy? Say it's another person in a relationship, and I never get it back.
Okay. Is that being said to you?
No.
No. I meant, they're basically, what you're saying is someone comes up and says, you never give me empathy.
No, I think what happens is one person on one side of the relationship might try their best to practice these things and get to empathy regularly, but is frustrated because it's not reciprocated.
Oh, yeah. What do you do in that situation?
Right.
Are you the person that is perceived as not giving empathy, or are you the person that is perceived as giving empathy?
Either one.
Okay. Well, if I'm the person perceived as not giving empathy, and that's voiced to me, and I will tell you that, I'll tell you a real honest story. God, I don't like this story because it's a real bugger of a one. I may have said it on this show, I don't know, but I was one of my last places that I worked at. I got a call. I had a call with a person. This person had pretty much sent me some "fuck you" emails. And it worked on on a team, and the emails just weren't to me. And basically, I got him on the phone. I was like, "Hey, what's going on?" And this person said, I don't feel psychologically safe with you. I went, that is not something that ever crossed my mind. And I really, again, immediately it hit. So obviously they didn't think I showed empathy. They probably didn't show any sort of listening, understanding, and it was really interesting, very interesting conversation. Cause I was like, okay, well, can you tell me what I've done? Or can you, and again, I tried to handle it as best I could. I didn't yell or anything. I just said, well, what can I do differently? And this person said, I don't want to work with you. And I was like, okay, I understand that. All right. I'll address it with the partners on the team, either get me removed or you removed. And actually it was kind of good because I didn't really, anyway, it doesn't matter. I didn't like being on the project I was working on with that person anyway. So when I was like, okay, I'll remove myself. But the point is they didn't see it. They didn't, but they voiced it. And so when you're on the non-receiving side of empathy, it's just like anything else, you voice it and you say, hey, and if and if you want, that person said, no, I'm not going to have any more interaction with you. And we didn't. Okay. So that's an option. You get the information and then you pivot and adjust and change, but you voice it. And if it's someone that you want to continue to have a relationship with, then you voice it. And then you figure out what empathy looks like for you. And you tell them, this is what empathy looks like for me. This is how I want you to show up. I think that is one of the biggest things that I have learned is to communicate what I need, not in terms of emotionally available. Okay, what the fuck does that look like in practice? How do I want it to be? And then I tell them, and then we try it out. And if they don't want to do it, then they won't do it. But I get to communicate. I'm not receiving this. I don't believe I'm receiving this. And then I tell you. Now, if you're on the other side of that, where you're being told that, and you're like, I don't understand, because this is, again, going back to my work. I called some people up, and it was funny because I called up one guy that and old school, and he goes, "What the psychological safety? Fuck that! They need to fucking get their shit done. What the hell? I mean, like literally, so." Boom, 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 boom. And I was like, okay, well, that's not kind of where I was going, but all right, thank you for at a girl and they're fucked up. It's them and not you. But so I ended up calling a team member who's underneath me that I have we've been through war together and we've talked a lot. And this person gave me an example, and he said, because I said, I leave my door open. I tell people, hey, this is, like I'm an open book. Hey, is there something? And he said to me, and I thought this was really interesting. He says, some people can't tell you. They don't have it within them to say, I'm uncomfortable. And he gave me an example in his life. And he said, and sometimes anything you do, it's not about you. It's about all of their shit. But he said, sometimes what you can do, because I said, I don't want to not be able to do anything, because there are people on my team that I want on my team. And if I'm pissing them off or I'm not showing empathy, and they're not getting it from me, I don't want them to just feel what I'm taking. And so what he said, which I thought was, and I used it a lot, is he said, well, because I cuss. Go figure, I cussed at work. And everybody basically got to a point on my teams if I wasn't using some foul language in our conversation, and I got real quiet and used very technical terms, they got worried because they knew shit was either hitting the fan, like I was real tied in. But he said, ask him, does this make you feel uncomfortable? Or is this showing, does this help how you feel? Does it validate? Does it make you feel like I'm giving you empathy? And those are really weird conversations to have at work. Hey, Am I on target here? Will this help? You seem to be upset because of this. Will it help if we moved this deadline, or if I said this different ways? I used to have, and again, it was me taking action and inquiring, what does empathy look like for you? And what was empathy? How do I help you not feel that way? And this was work. Now, in a relationship where I've been at times where there was no empathy, it was, I got a chance to pivot. I mean, you don't go to a dry well looking for water. I think the magic can happen is when you have a person who doesn't believe that they're given empathy and a person who does. Okay, because there's that. Oh my God, I'm not getting it, but I want it, and you're going, well, I'm giving it to you, damn it. But then because you care and because you love, you get to go, okay, well, this is how I think I'm giving it, and they're going, yeah, that's not the G spot, babe. You know, this is how I want to receive it. Does that make? I mean, that's my answer. I don't know if it makes sense.
I think it's like what I heard you saying is it feels like almost like empathy is like really close to the idea of love. And like people have different love languages. Like you can be trying to show love to somebody and like, nope, that's it. That's not, you're missing that. That's not helping me out at all.
Yeah. And again, the three, there's one that's cognitive, like, okay. And there's the others, you know, the affective where it's more, ooh, God, yeah, I feel that. Ooh, that, and you start describing that, and you can see that in people's faces. You're like, oh yeah, and then you kind of bond there. So yeah, I think it is. But again,
so they could be looking for a different kind of empathy than the one you are displaying or trying to display, or maybe you just don't have any empathy at all.
Yeah, right. You're just like, fuck you. I don't really give a shit. I think so, because no one. We talk about pantry here. This is all can be in her pantry, but every human being we interact with and we go with, we have to figure out how much of this and what type of this and what kind of like all of these ingredients are different. And so in your pantry, when you're dealing with somebody in a relationship, I mean, the relationship you have with a friend that you were 5 years ago is going to be different, even if it's still that same friendship than you have today. So again, you're always baking a different type of cake. These are just ingredients, and you get to. That's the great thing about communication is you get to go, how's that taste? And like, nah, too much salt, you know? And again, I think that's one of the best things about relationships that allow that is I'm not coming from it from a standpoint of I have to fix them, I have to control them, I have to educate them. I'm just coming from a standpoint of I care. I care about you as a human. I care about you as my friend. I care about you as my wife, auntie, boyfriend, you know, all of that stuff. And therefore, I'm going to give you feedback about how this cake tastes and tell you what ingredients and the amounts that I want. And then if I care enough about you, I'm going to bake the cake differently. If I don't, I'm not. And I think that's real hard for people to deal with, is when they look at somebody and they go, and they express that. And again, that toxic empathy where we give them more empathy and they don't give anything back. And we use that as kind of like an enabler of bullshit behavior. Oh, they'll get it. No, people treat you the way they feel about you. So,
have you read that book, Switch? There was one of the principles in the book was about how self-control is a limited resource. Mm-hmm. And like you start with your day with a certain amount. And so, which kind of makes sense throughout the day. If you use all your self-control and then it's the end of the day and you need some and you blow it. Do you think that empathy can be kind of an exhaustible resource?
I think it can be. Well, for me, empathy gets short for me when I don't take care of myself, when I got shit going on. And when I'm also in relationships that, again, it's not so much that it's an exhaustive resource, but it's just like, yeah, I don't have that for you anymore. You don't get it anymore from me. And so I like to be in reciprocal relationships. They don't always have to be 50-50. I mean, that's just not, but it's reciprocal, this ebb and this flow. It's not the balance. It's an ebb and a flow. It's a rhythm. But if I'm not getting, you can't pour from an empty cup. And also, my empathy, if you don't give me any back, or if you're taking, what's this really about? What's the real issue here?
Yeah, I think there's some situations where I can think of like work situations or even relationships that's like, oh, this is not good. We should just pull the plug on this. We don't need to be friends,
No, it is. And I think that's one of the things where in empathy, where you go, ooh, you feel that way. Like with this kid, he felt that way. And he was like, no, we're done. And it was actually probably a really good thing for a lot of reasons. One, I didn't like him working on my projects. Two, it was just always this conflict. So if you're not going to be able to make it better,
Yeah.
They say, I remember in my past life, they were doing a reorg. So basically they were letting people go. And they were like, well, we're just going to give them an opportunity to find other employment opportunities.
Yeah. Release them into their next job. Or
Yeah.
whatever
I'm
phrases.
just, setting you free to go find your next wife, But I don't necessarily need to love someone, and that means all of it. That's a choice that I make when I show up in that. And empathy is part of that, LUVE. And if I choose not to, typically it's because that relationship is not worth it to me. So my empathy, I have lots of it when I'm centered and stuff, but when I'm running short, I'm going to give it a little bit less to things that give less to me. But most of the time I can give empathy, and this may come across really, hey, tit for tat and all that shit. But most of the time I don't have a problem giving empathy when I get out of the way, when I'm not trying to defend or anything. But if it's upside down, why am I spending this? Why am I throwing, like they say, throwing good money after bad? Why? What's going on here? What's the purpose of this relationship? And if it's just to maintain someone else's ego, emotions, or anything like that, yeah, there are other people I'd rather work on this, because it does take work. I mean, shit, think about it. If we listen and not respond, that means I got to shut up. That takes a lot of work. If I'm putting my advice monster and trying to understand, well, how the hell did they get here? How does 2 + 2 = 7? What the fuck?
Using up all your self-control.
Yeah. But again, that flows when when I care about that person and that person cares about me, because there's that, oh yeah, it's worth it. And again, it's funny, I listening to that Crucial Conversations the other day, and part of it is they're like, if you're having the conversation the same conversation more than once, you're tackling the wrong problem. And so it's like, why are we tackling the same problem over and over? Maybe we should disband. But I have really enjoyed this. I think that this has been a good place for me to be when I approach my conversations, to really love someone, to listen, to not to respond, to understand and step into their logic of how they got there, to validate, hey, I see that you can do that from that point of view. And then basically how to empathize. Okay, that's how you feel. All right, let's figure this out. And again, then we get to the point of, all right, let's figure this out. How do you feel differently? How do I feel differently? And how do we make it going forward? I don't know. It's really hard to do this sometimes. Well, sometimes, a lot of times. But it makes my relationships meaningful. And I'll also tell you this, my relationship size has shrunk. Because I don't need, you were saying self-control and you only have so much during the day. I like it. You've seen this is my last flying fuck,
Yeah.
that's kind of, you only have so many fucks to give and they must be earned. And that's kind of where I'm at with relationships nowadays. And so when I practice, because it does take practice and it does take energy, and to show love and to give love, not just to myself, but to others, I kind of have to give a shit. And if I don't give a shit, then I need to go, why are we having this relationship? Sometimes it's just a transactional relationship. Other times, why am I in this really deep, marred relationship? And why do I care if it's not good? And it's so hard and takes up so much energy to do it. So I am really, really grateful to have people in my life that practice this, that do love me. And I'm learning how to love myself. And again, empathy on myself is, okay, you feel this way. All right, what are we going to do about it, girl? How do we not do this? How do we show up differently? How do we do this differently? So it's interesting. So this is the conclusion of it. I hope that you've had a great journey with us. And we're going to do some fun ones next week. And they're going to be funny. And then we're going to come back and do a series on crucial conversations. So ladies, gentlemen, until next time, Tubbs.
Thanks for tuning in to Fear with Christine Spratley, living like a head in charge. Don't forget to subscribe, leave a review, tell her what topics you want to hear, and share this episode with someone who could use a pantry full of boldness in their life. Remember, life isn't about aging with grace. It's about aging with mischief, audacity, and having a damn good story to tell. So show up, take action, and keep saying fear.